I want to show you how a creative agency that we worked with flipped profits around, went from losing money to having hope for the future, and went from having no clarity on what was happening in the business financially to having crystal clear metrics around what was making the money, what was losing the money, and exactly what they needed to change in order to flip profitability. This is a business who had been doing really well for a long time. They're an established business. But then something happened and things started to change in the economy, and they started seeing that, gosh, our profits certainly aren't what they were like a couple of years ago. So we're going to walk through this case study step by step. You can read on the screen if you want to. I'm just going to walk you through this to see what were the problems they're facing, how did we solve them, and what might you do as a result if you have a similar business. Okay, so this was a creative agency doing things like branding, web design, web development out of Texas. They're serving clients all over the country, but they had a multi-entity structure that also made things a little bit difficult, where they would get some money into one company and then pipe that into another company that would actually be doing the fulfillment of their work. And so that also muddied the waters when it came to having financial clarity on things. From a team standpoint, they had a blend of in-house salaried employees and part-time contractors, which again muddied the waters for them. So they were facing a couple distinct challenges. Number one, they had blended revenue. In other words, when you looked at their profit and loss statement, it was all smushed into one income line. So they couldn't tell how much money they were making from their different service lines. Two, they had their labor buried under payroll. And so even though what they actually sold was, their employees' time and talent, they weren't able to go split that out and say, okay, on web design jobs, we spent this much of our employees' salary. And on, these projects were spending this amount of time and money. So they just had no clarity around their gross margins. And then they had these significant cash flow variances versus what they were forecasting. They had this great projection, but when it turned out, as the year went along, it was like, hey, I actually have no clue why the money isn't coming in the way it should be. Why is this? And why do things look so dire? So what did we implement? Well, first we went into their profit and loss statement and we said, we need to reorganize how we're doing this. We need to go pull out from your different service lines, what money are you making where? And so we identified 4 or 5 core service lines within their business, worked with their bookkeeper to help them separate those out. Their team got things cleaned up, and now they have very clear lines on their P&L. So they know exactly how much is coming from a design project or development projects. Okay. So that was step number 1. Step number 2 was we looked at their direct labor and outsourced costs, meaning the people that were performing their services, and said, hey, if you have these people on salary, let's go figure out how much of their time is spent doing these types of jobs. Came up with this really cool tool that I thought was super fun, but I'm a big nerd, to split out all of their labor. And then we could get exact gross margins per product or service that they offered. And this allowed us to see very clearly, all right, there's a certain portion of the business that's doing really well. We got margins great up here. And boy, under this service line, our margins aren't looking nearly as good. Even though it's the same man hours going to those projects, we're making a lot less profit per man hour. And that's a problem. So once we figured that out, then we can start to realign both their marketing and sales efforts, maybe even their pricing and packaging, to decide how do we make things more profitable given the people and services that we can provide. Finally, actually, there's 2 more things. Bear with me here. This next one was really cool, super nerdy. But we built a forecast tool that broke down the timing of their different things. So number 1, they have sales. Number 2, they have certain time frames when they collect based on those, or bill based on those sales. And number 3, when they actually collect on those sales and the existing jobs that they had in the pipeline. As we sat down to look at their projections, we were noticing that they were projecting certain collections within a time frame that A, either wasn't reasonable, or B, with jobs that were indefinitely kicked down the road. And we found that they had hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases of jobs that maybe were under contract, but had just ultimately fallen through the cracks for whatever reason. And so they were expecting that income, but never receiving it, and couldn't identify why they didn't have the cash that they expected to have. So as we dug into their records and figured out, we've got a bunch of realistically dead jobs here that are just sort of perpetually, being pushed down the forecast. And so that just breeds frustration amongst the leadership team when they see we should have this money, but we don't. Why? And so as we got really clear on the timing of those 3 things, sales, billing, and collections, then we've been building out this really cool forecast for each of those things that ultimately can give us a cash flow forecast over the next 12 months. Super nerdy, but really fun and incredibly powerful for decision making. Finally, we came up with this accounts receivable dashboard. I already kind of tipped my hat here on this one, but in looking at how much are you actually going to collect? And then we specified things like, all right, what percentage of billings are collected in 0 to 30 days? Okay, what about 30 to 60? What about 90 plus? Okay, what percentage of your new sales get billed in month 1 versus month 2 versus month 3? Right now, what we're even doing is connecting all of that to when their cost of goods are going to be recognized. In other words, figuring out when does cash actually come in the business and when does it actually go out, so we can plan realistically. So let's talk impact for these guys. Estimated ROI for this. So they're doing around $2.5 to $3.5 million, give or take. The first thing from an ROI standpoint is that we clarified their gross margins like we talked about, so that they knew what we call true gross margins. This is never something that I see bookkeepers do. I don't even see most true CFOs do this, where we look at per service line and we really dig into the P&L together to say, what actual costs do you accrue? Things like payment processing fees, things like contractor payments for these specific things, things like what percentage of payroll is going to this, what percentage of marketing, what percentage of sales commissions, the stuff that like, oh yeah, for every sale, we do have those costs. We figure those out at a deep level for each of their service lines so that they could say, we know exactly what we need to focus on and what we need to shift. Then they can look at things and say, gosh, our salesperson maybe isn't performing as well as we thought they were. Maybe we need to make some adjustments there. Maybe we need to set some KPIs for how much we need to sell instead of just sort of skating along thinking, yeah, we're making sales, right? So we clarified gross margins. 2, we got a lot more predictability with their cash flow so that they can make much better decisions around things like, should we invest in a marketing company? Should we invest in hiring an HR manager, right? All of these decisions where you're like, all right, what will this do to our company? We can plug those into our cash flow projections and say, 7 months down the road, we expect to be making this much. What happens if we hire this person or change this position around? Okay. Number 3, and this was the big one ultimately for them. We saw that, and this is really common for a lot of companies, we saw that as they had grown, they had increased their overhead a lot. This happens for fast growing companies. We bring on people, processes, softwares, etc., that stack up month to month. And we're up here, right? It's expensive. But then maybe there's a market correction. Maybe we become more efficient. And either way, we end up having, for some reason, maybe less revenue than we want. And we keep that high overhead. And this is the position for this company where they didn't really adjust based on the demand that was placed on their business. And so as demand had dropped off a little bit, they needed to make some adjustments. So we went into their overhead and found what things do we not need anymore that that wouldn't affect our day-to-day business operations. This is something that you're probably doing if you've started down this road and you're like, hey, how do I adjust? But we really dug into each of their big core expenses to see how can we make this expense either more efficient or just not have it at all. And one of the big places that they actually found was they had too many people and not enough work for them. And this is a difficult situation for any business, but for them specifically, we found that after doing all of these things and letting some natural attrition happen in the team while not replacing those team members and instead having outsourced contractors that in another world might feel more expensive, but here they're just filling in the gaps of what their salaried team members couldn't fulfill on, then they were able to reduce overhead by $160,000 a year. And that's a big deal because that goes straight to profit. And so now we have not only clarity on what's working, a great heads up on what's going to happen down the road based on our cash flow projections, but we're plugging the leaks in the boat so that we're not taking on water that we shouldn't. That was a weird analogy. Maybe that's the wrong analogy for this case. Either way, we made it so their business is easier to run and much more profitable. So what's next for them or in a business like this? Well, we're going to now implement class-based reporting in QuickBooks. It's a nerdy way of saying, let's get really specific in QuickBooks so that we can run a by-class report to see, all right, for this service line, what are my COGS? For this service line, what are my COGS? For this service line, what are my COGS? And we can see kind of real-time margins within QuickBooks. Number two, we're going to focus on helping them improve sales metrics and reporting, where in the past they didn't really have to focus on it. It was just like, I know it just happens all the time. But as we dug into the numbers, it's like, hey, let's start tracking clear metrics around each stage of your sales pipeline to see where people are falling off and where we need to improve. Number three, they use HubSpot. So now we can use HubSpot data to forecast pipeline to collection timing. It's like, all right, if we have this many deals in the pipeline, what's our conversion rate? What's our billing rate off that? What's our collection rate off that? And instead of saying, we think we're going to make $100,000 this month in sales, we can say, all right, what's likely based on what's in the pipeline? And then we can extrapolate that out to cash flow forecasting. That stuff's fun. Finally, now they can work off a concrete budget to actual tool to respond to shifts in sales and collections to improve profitability in the upcoming year. In other words, instead of having this sort of pie in the sky, like we think this is what will happen, now we think this is what's going to happen based on real data, and this is what has actually happened, and here's the gap. And so if we see a gap widening across the year, we can go actually adjust to it rather than just saying like, we're not where we want to be. Why? And we can get very specific and say, okay, is it that revenue has changed? Is it that COGS have changed? Is it that expenses have changed? If so, which expenses and why? Having a budget to actual just makes things so much more clear. And that'll be where they take things next. So there's a case study. If you are like these folks and you're like, man, I want more clarity, like reach out to us, ceofinanceacademy.com. We got you. Otherwise, there's a bunch more case studies here where we show you all our inside tactics of what we actually do with companies and the results on the other side of those. Feel free to binge watch those, and we'll see you on the other side.